Horning, Reginald Andre, and Randy Bryan.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Security Squawk podcast. I am your co-host, Brian Horning, with Reginald Andre and Randy Bryan. Welcome to another week, gentlemen. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well.
How are you doing, Andre?
Almost Christmas, man.
Almost. So we got lots to talk about in a short period of time. We got to wrap up in about 25 minutes due to our schedules. So we're just going to run right into it. And today we're going to talk about a bunch of things. Number one, the title of the show is Critical Infrastructure Under Attack. And we're going to talk about how some utility companies, water utility companies in the United States have been attacked. We're also going to talk about some banks that have been attacked. We're going to update you on some cyber attacks that we talked about last week, one of those being Fidelity National and what they are up to and where they're at with their cyber attack. Plus our government's been attacked, and we're going to talk about how they were attacked and what you might want to look out so you don't become a victim like they did. Before we jump into all that stuff, remember to share our show. Helps us grow our channel with finding people like you who are interested in topics like this and learning how to secure their business and themselves from cyber criminals. Sharing, liking, putting a comment or a review on a podcasting platform if you're listening to us through audio. But if you're watching us on any of the social media channels, you can always drop a comment. You can drop a comment while we're live. We might answer it. But we're always looking for comments throughout the week as we have people monitoring the channels for that kind of stuff. So if you drop a comment at any time, we're more than likely either going to answer it there or on the show. So anything else you guys want to add before we jump into it?
No, sir.
Good. Oh, yeah, we don't do commercials. So that's even more of a reason to share the show, right? So all right, so let's get into it. So first one we're going to talk about is this craziness with the water companies getting hacked. And there's been a bunch of them across the United States. And CISA has put out, what do we have? CISA is reaching out directly to these water utilities about exposed Unitronics devices. And I don't know a whole lot about this, but what I do know is apparently there's a known vulnerability in these devices that I guess Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps decided to attack in the last week or so, and they're citing the war in Israel as the reason why they feel like they can do this to these water companies. These water companies, at least one of them in Pennsylvania, needed to go offline and manage their water pressure manually as a result of this. This is pretty wild stuff, guys. What are your thoughts on Iran attacking our water system? And they'll also point out, we know we're going to talk about two on the show today, but it's been reported that there's been about a dozen or so to this point who may have been impacted. They're just not releasing where.
I think it's kind of ironic, before we get into it, that it is Iran, because a lot of people have heard of the Stuxnet, which was a malware back in the day, which actually targeted Iran's nuclear reactors and didn't need internet to get there. It just traveled among random devices around the world to ultimately hack their nuclear facilities. So it is kind of ironic that they're reaching out and doing this. Similarly, against, basically this is a device that's used to regulate water pressure. So tons of water supply utilities, whatever they're called in your state, use these things to make sure that the water pressure is correct. So this potentially is a pretty huge deal.
Yeah, and apparently these devices are being shipped out with the default passwords, which kind of reminds me back when I used to work at CompUSA and all the routers had the same, admin and password.
Yes.
now if you at least buy a router, it's gonna be unique. There's gonna be a unique password for every device. So it's crazy that this company is still doing it this old-fashioned way.
Yeah, and the other thing, CISA and the FBI have gotten involved, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to help these water companies address these issues.
Yep.
Because the bigger problem is that a bigger issue and a bigger challenge behind this is apparently these devices were sold under different brands. So I guess you're talking about a controller or one component. So that would be like, all the dishwasher manufacturers in the world buying a particular board for their washing machines
Which
from.
they already do, by the way.
Right. So that's to illustrate a point. That's basically what you have here. They may have bought a different brand, system to manage their thing, but all the systems that are sold to these water companies use this particular part from this manufacturer. So they're trying to get ahead of this by identifying all of the manufacturers, all the systems that contain this part, and it can be done under different names. So when you hear the name, I don't remember the name off the top of my head. Do you guys have it of the what it's called?
Unitronics?
What's that?
Device, the PLC.
Yeah,
Unitronics.
Unitronics. That's it. You got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Unitronics. So you might not know that you have a Unitronics PLC in your system because you bought, system ABC company, and that's what that's the brand, right? But you don't realize that it has this component in it, and this is what they're trying to get ahead of before other water companies get hit. So it's a pretty big deal, right? It's not like, hey, if you use a Ubiquiti Unified controller, you need to update your controller, right? This goes a little deeper into the components that you might not recognize the name or the brand or realize that you now have a problem.
But the crazy thing is, if they're attached to the internet, which a lot of them are, that you can actually go into Shodan and search, and that's how CISA is finding these utilities and reaching out to them by looking for them on Shodan, and they're showing that their whatever vulnerability is opened up towards the internet, and then they're able to reach out to them from there. The other crazy thing, I can't speak for all the other states, but in Texas, a lot of these utility districts are basically privately owned. So they're regulated by the state as a corporate, almost like a public corporation, but they're still privately owned. A lot of them are just mom and pops that own them in Texas. I don't know how that is in other states, but that to me makes it a little more vulnerable, because how in the world are they going to hear about this? You know what I mean? They're just checking their water meters every month or whatever. They don't know all this stuff about cybersecurity and all this jazz we talk about. You know what I mean? So I think that makes them a little extra vulnerable.
Yeah, and to just show you how simple, what CISA is basically saying, this is what you need to do. If you have one of these systems, change the default password. So again, just going back to if you got this product in the first place, you're an IT administrator, that should have been the first thing you do anyways. Second, change the default port used by the PLC, which that's questionable because, it's a different port number, but whatever.
We can find it.
Yep. And then the next one is put it behind a firewall or VPN, or do some type of multi-factor. And then the last one is do your updates. So there's nothing super complicated that shouldn't have been done in the first place for these two cities we're going to be talking about to have done.
And that's the sad thing, or the sad reality. I would say 95% of the attacks we talk about, they're not really super complicated. They're ingenious, but they're just looking for these vulnerabilities, and they're putting them together, putting 2 and 2 together and equaling 4, and pulling off an attack to steal money, basically.
Yeah. So this brings up a couple good points that I want to bring up with you guys around this stuff. Number one is that here we are with another critical infrastructure attack, where the Biden administration has, put forth efforts since they've been in office to improve cybersecurity in the U.S., and especially critical infrastructure. And a lot of critical infrastructure in this country is privately owned. And then, this to me is just another example of another industry or another sector that's going to be impacted by more regulation, more laws, and they're going to be required to do more in the next 12 to 18 months to make sure things like this don't happen. Do you guys see it any different?
They're going to try.
I can't wait.
And then another thing that we're kind of seeing here is if we're reading the tea leaves of what's going on with this. Number one, this, they're calling it hacktivism, right? Because it's done under the fact that it's an Israeli company, and they basically are saying that the people who did this are basically saying that because this is an Israeli-made piece of equipment, that it's fair game. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but then if this ever got to a point, guys, where you would need to recover systems and you wanted to use your insurance to do so, a lot of the cybersecurity, and this is, I just want to point this out and bring this up quickly. A lot of cyber insurance policies out there exclude coverage from things like active war. And I wouldn't be surprised if, the insurance companies try to get this, if it ever amounted to that, which I don't think it will, but this is an example of how a company can get hacked. And, they may think that they have cyber insurance to back them up, and something like this could potentially put that in jeopardy.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's a great point.
Yeah, it is. I would also, I think some of this hacktivism it's just a smokescreen. Ultimately, they're doing it to make money, because every single ransomware note I've ever read on a computer always says, we're doing this as a service to let you know that your IT company's not doing their job or you weren't being secure, and we pointed it out for you. So they've always had this kind of aura, this fake aura that, hey, they're doing something good in the world by doing all this stuff. So I think this whole hacktivism thing, I don't know, Iran doesn't like Israel regardless, whether there's Hamas involved or not. Israel will go and blow up a building out in the desert that was probably a reactor or whatever. I think there's a lot of hatred there anyway. I think this is just a ruse, in my opinion. So,
is there a ransom attached to what they're doing? I thought they were just.
I guess we'll see in these next. They've already. It sounds like they released information, but we'll have to look into these attacks to see.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a ransom situation or they're just bricking the systems.
Right.
I have no idea. So I guess we'll find out more when we know more.
Yep.
But this also brings up a good point where a lot of people are starting to kind of turn this on the Israeli company who created this software, and kind of pointing the fingers at them, saying that they are putting out unsecure software and devices, and that there needs to be a greater responsibility for cybersecurity for manufacturers of information technology, software, and hardware, which is also part of kind of the Biden cybersecurity plan, is to require people who produce these kind of things to do it to a certain standard and not put stuff out there that's chock full of bugs that can be, hacked and eventually used to take down systems and cripple industries and businesses. That's really what the ultimate goal of that is. What are your guys' thoughts there on the actual manufacturers being, part of the blame of this?
I mean,
100%. I mean, we talked about this in other videos as well, talking about IoT devices and, you know, your smart cameras, your printers, your thermostats, all of this stuff connecting to the internet. There has to be a standard of security that just the consumer just can't assume that they have to, they can't just assume they have to change their password. I mean, just something as simple as, look, your password by default, even if they said your password by default is 1111, but as soon as you log in, we're forcing you to change it. But you got to have some type of security.
Yeah, and the I want to say this week for sure in the last 10 days, the assistant executive director, not the assistant to the executive director. Sorry, little office joke there. Nobody got it. Okay, will not be here all week. Anyway, the assistant executive director, I think is what it was, of CISA, actually said this week he wants to move away from the onus being on users to do patching and things like that. He specifically mentioned patching and said he wants to move it to where the onus is now on the manufacturers. And, you know, that does make sense. It makes a lot of sense because, like in this case, if they would have just shipped the password printed on a label on the bottom, like routers do now these days, boom, problem solved. You know, have it connect to a random port in the little sign up process. You pick a port, you know, have it random like that. All this stuff could easily be solved by the manufacturer, I guess is my point. Not even a chuckle for that joke.
No, maybe the audience did, but
you smirked a tiny little bit. You were typing though. Anyway.
So moving right along, guys. So we also have a water facility plant in Texas, and not to kind of beat a dead horse here, but is there anything in particular with the Texas incident that stood out to you versus what we talked about in Pennsylvania?
Just that this is a really big one. 850 employees, 2 million people that are getting service from this utility. This is not your average mom and pop utility like you see out in rural areas. This is a really big, you know, a really big utility. I mean, Texas has like 30 million plus people. So 1 out of 15 ish getting their water from this utility. It's a pretty big deal.
I think Randy's storing some water in his bathtub right now, just in case.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So now we have, moving right along, we have a bigger deal here, which is we're seeing the financial sector really start to take it on the chin in the last couple of weeks. We're going to wrap up the show with an update on Fidelity National Financial. If you have mortgage or you're trying to buy a house in the last week, you may have been impacted by this. But we're going to jump into this whole 60 credit unions across the U.S. have been impacted by a cyber attack because of their IT provider, at least one of their IT providers or a popular IT provider has been dealing with ransomware. And from my knowledge of the situation, guys, what I know is that there was a larger company, a parent company of Trellance that owns a company called Ongoing Operations. And essentially this group, Ongoing Operations, provides local credit unions with what they claim to be cloud-based business kind of continuity type services, which it's kind of ironic that these businesses that rely on these services to keep their operations running, this group that's kind of what they do for them is now down and cannot provide that service. So thoughts on this, guys? This is a pretty big deal. It's impacting a lot of credit unions across the U.S., causing customers to be able to not access certain things like payment portals for loans, car loans, things like that. What do you guys think about this?
No, it just talks about how damage can always be caused by supply chain, and just don't look at your internal systems that you're using, like the computers and routers and switches, but you know, what other applications are you depending on every day? and having a plan if those things go down.
Yeah, and the underlying vulnerability here is this CitrixBleed. And, like the name says, bleed just means when you're going from one side of something, like a membrane or a wall or whatever, to the other. And this particular vulnerability, information, basically to put it in layperson's terms, the information basically stays in memory even after it's not being used, which basically allows the attacker to pull out without any kind of authentication, just to pull information out of memory. So probably this was shut down. These were shut down probably out of caution, because it's a very real vulnerability. And if the attacker gets access to that system, can just start pulling that information down without having any kind of logins or anything like that. So it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I mean, this CitrixBleed, not to go off on that, because it is a big deal. This is kind of becoming like the move it of the back end of 2023, even though move it's still being exploited like crazy. But this is kind of the new one, and it looks to me like a bunch of ransomware groups are taking advantage of it. You got Alpha V is kind of hitting the healthcare sector. It seems like Lockbit's also, making some money off the CitrixBleed vulnerability. And then, because I think we're gonna find out Fidelity National. I think in those show notes I have who hacked them, and I think it was Black Hat. So these groups are just jumping all over this vulnerability because they know what they can do once they get in there. So what else do you guys see coming out of this CitrixBleed or the attack on the 60 credit unions?
I mean, the sky's the limit, if you ask me, on this, because there are people out there who have this vulnerability in their systems that don't even know about it. I think, like you said, it's going to be the move it of December 2023 for sure. There's just a lot of potential for bad growth here, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, and just so everybody knows, ongoing operations, they had this thing called a FedComp platform, and it's used by numerous credit unions across the U.S. and it wasn't patched for the CitrixBleed, which led to the ransomware attack that caused significant operational disruption. So that's what happened with the credit union. So
it's today the December 4th, right? Yesterday was the day that they start having to report to the SEC within the certain amount of time.
Yes, correct.
So we'll definitely get more news articles.
Well, we're going to get quicker reporting from a lot more companies, starting today, because they're going to be held accountable if they don't. We've already, like we said on the show, we've already seen plenty of companies start to adhere to it even before the deadline, at least somewhat. But now their feet are going to be held to the fire. So, all right, guys, moving right along. We got to finish up because we got to end the show here. So let's go into this whole talk about the U.S. government agencies using Adobe ColdFusion and an exploit. ColdFusion is actually, it's crazy, but ColdFusion is widely used in our government. It was, for whatever reason, it's a popular programming language, if you want to call it that, platform and for whatever reason, because I don't know, the only reason I know this is because I used to work in the government and I used to see jobs and job postings like left and right for people with ColdFusion experience. So what's going on here? Do you guys have any insight on? I know there was a vulnerability in ColdFusion that allowed hackers to gain initial access to government servers, which is pretty wild. And ColdFusion is a web server platform, right? So you write code and you run this server this server platform to serve up web pages. So it is usually exposed to the internet because a lot of government agencies that run their own webs, or maybe they have content management systems. That's a big thing that used to be built back in the day. And I'm talking, I worked for the government, over 20 years ago. But back then they were building web portals and intranets and things like that using CMS, content management systems. So you could basically have people with no knowledge of coding or programming update a website or update something that's out on the web. And this is pretty popular in the US government. So your thoughts on this, guys?
Well, one of the things I'm realizing is they're talking about specific versions. You got 2018 and then it looks like 2013. So what is the refresh cycle for this type of application if it's so popular?
Dude, I mean, they just write it. I mean, they're not.
Yeah.
I would have to say that there's probably a major lack of awareness around the fact that you need to update this stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if they're, just because of the way the government buys, right, that if there's some small division of the deal, of some small division in the Navy that hired some company to come build them something so they could share information either internally or on the internet with people, and make it so like Sally, who is a secretary, can update it, right? And they hired a contractor to build that, and then they built it, and they've been using it ever since, and nobody's thought twice about going back and checking it and updating it and making sure it's actually secure.
You're probably right on that. It says that the servers that were affected were unpatched. So yeah, they did come out in the last week or so and say we want to move away from patching to the onus being on the manufacturer, but this would have happened had they not been patched. So I think it's going to have to be a both and. Y'all, patching is unsexy, but it needs to keep happening. And we need to have manufacturers be more responsible for their stuff, auto updates, doing things right, all that jazz we already talked about. But yeah, 2 unpatched servers in this case, which is ironic.
Get it.
You know?
Yeah, I just don't get it. This is 101 stuff, man.
I mean, it's hard to be preachy to the rest of the business world if the government doing the preaching is not also updating their systems.
But it's also interesting to me that, reading this article, and I'm going to get a little kind of in the weeds here with the stuff that we know, right? But when I read in that there were 2 incidents, they attacked 2 different servers. They were basically able to do a reverse proxy shell to install a remote access Trojan on these servers, which is wild. But they were able, in both cases, the attacks were detected and blocked in time before they could exfiltrate data or do any further lateral movement. Like, it's amazing to me that you have detection in place to detect like this behavior, but you're not scanning the network for the vulnerability in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like you skipped over 1st grade and went right to 12th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it's great that you have detection like this, but at the same time, you need to be looking for the vulnerabilities. So, because I got to imagine they caught this by the skin of their teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're talking about minutes or seconds of if you didn't catch this and you gave them just a few more minutes, they would have exfiltrated data.
Yep.
And who knows, they may have exfiltrated data, but maybe what they caught was the mass movement of data off of their network, and they were like, what the hell's going on over here? Yep. And then they cut it off.
Well, and the thing is, Brian, you don't want to just be relying on your amazing system to catch this, because maybe they figured out a way to fly under the radar with some sort of unknown 0 day. So you've got to do the patching, have your amazing system, have other things in place, so if they get through one of them, it's not the end of the world. It's just, it raises a red flag. But yeah, it is ironic to have that level of detection and then have these unpatched servers just sitting there.
Yeah, with no vulnerabilities. That's the point. So
and it could be, I'm not saying this is right, but people will update servers, especially specialty servers, and then they break. And then they get this this resistance to updating because the last time we updated that thing, it broke and we were down for 3 days. I know that's the case with like old versions of Exchange server and things like that. I don't know. Maybe these ColdFusion servers have a history of that. I don't know. I'm trying to find a human side to this.
Well, we'll update everybody once we kind of find out more, and if there's anything juicy to add to this, we'll certainly bring it up. All right, guys, we got to wrap up the show, but I want to kind of touch on this Fidelity National real quick. Fidelity National mortgage, big player in the mortgage and title space, had a cyber attack, and they're starting to kind of release more information saying they're starting to get back on their feet a little bit, but it's taking quite some time as we kind of predicted it would. It's one of the largest title insurance firms in the U.S., and they successfully contained the cyber attack. Happened on November 19th, and they emphasize that their ongoing efforts to resume normal business operations are underway. So they're trying to get back on their feet. Now, I know people who have a mortgage serviced by this company, and they haven't been able to make a mortgage payment since this happened. And as of like 2 or 3 days ago, that's still the case. They're working with outside firms to, get back on their feet. They basically cut everything off. They knew they were dealing with an attack, and they kind of took the drastic measure of taking everything offline so they could figure out kind of where it was coming from, which is, the right thing to do at the end of the day. And they're still trying to figure out if these unauthorized third parties access company data, what systems they touched. So the full extent is yet to be known and disclosed to the public, and especially the SEC. This is a $2.8 billion company in the third quarter of 2023. So, this company has significant cash to play with. And the Alpha V Black Cat ransomware group are the ones that came forward and said they did this. And you'll know that name because this is the same group that hit MGM and Caesars just a few months ago. Fidelity's response to the attack included notifying regulators and law enforcement authorities as part of their compliance and responsible handling of a cyber incident, although the information they gave is very, very limited at the time. So, guys, what do you think? I guess I'm just going to hit you with this and we'll end the show. How much longer do you think before this company actually is back up on their feet 100%? I mean, because really, that's the goal, and that's kind of the standard that businesses need to get to with incident response and business continuity planning is, ultimately you want to be able to get through an event without anybody like really noticing or having any impact. But when there is impact and you have to do something like take all your systems offline to kind of figure out where things started and where things are going to end. How long do you guys think this company is going to be dealing with this? I already predicted months, and people kind of said to me, no way. And I kind of said, well, either they're paying the ransom and that's how they're getting back on their feet quicker because they're working with the criminals and they know the criminals aren't going to continue to mess with them. Or they don't know what they're talking about. And I'm in the camp of they don't know what they're talking about.
I agree with you 1,000,000,000%. They don't know what they're talking about. Any company is going to be dealing with this for 3 to 6 months. Even if they have the best everything in place, once something like what has happened, you're going to have potential lawsuits. You're going to have to find out how they got in, make sure they're out, because even if you paid the ransom, They're still probably gave access to their buddies, if you will. Like, just to say that, oh, it's 3 weeks in and out. I just can't see that. Like, best case scenario, they're still going to have something they're dealing with easy 3 to 6 months down the road. That's my opinion. So I agree with you. They don't know what they're talking about. So,
Andre, you're awfully quiet.
No, same. I know Randy's got to go, so I was just trying to keep quiet. But I'm going to go to 6 months and more because of the legal situation.
Yep. And this will probably go into the hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. So,
yikes.
We'll keep everyone posted. Thanks, guys, for your input. Randy, I know you got to go, so we won't stay on too long. As always, leave comments, share our show, and rate us on the podcasting platform if you listen to us. We appreciate the support, and we'll see you all next week.